Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, January 26th meeting of your Irving, Las Colinas Rotary Club. If you will rise with me, our invocation day will be led by Reverend Bill Barr, our pledge by Val Bozak. We're not having a song of Losandras here. We might ask her to sing for us. But Donna will introduce our visiting Rotarians and guests, and Terry will introduce our speaker. So, Bill, glad you're here.
Just one thing I want to make you aware of before we pray. The chief of police showed up yesterday morning at the Henry Holmes breakfast. And some of you may recall it was on the news that there was a horrific incident in Memphis earlier where 5 police officers beat a young man to death. The video of that is going to hit today. And Eddie Garcia told our chief that if you took the Rodney King and the George Floyd videos and combined them and amped them up by 10, they do not equal the violence and the horrific nature of that video. So just be aware of that. Of course, after that comes out, everybody's going to have an opinion. Most of them are going to stink. So, but it's a horrible day, and he's very concerned about policing and respect for police officers. It's a sobering conversation. Join me in spirit of prayer. Eternal God, we give you thanks for the blessing of this day. It's a beautiful winter day outside. We've had rain this week. We give you thanks for the rain and the cool temperatures and the sunshine, and look forward to more of all of that over the next few days. We give you thanks for our club, its presence in our community. We ask your spirit to be upon us, upon our work, and upon this food, and take it to the nourishment of our bodies, and then keep us in your peace. In the name of Christ, amen.
Please join me in honoring our flag. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. I want to welcome those that are joining us online. So I see Randy Hubbard there. Hello, Randy, and Chris Dobson. So we're glad that we have a few joining us online, and grateful for those of you that are in the room here today. I know that Shane's traveling, and there's several others that are out today. We want to keep Patty Caperton in prayer. She's having a minor procedure today, so let's be mindful of that. Donna, do we have some visiting Rotarians or guests? Sandra Davidson is with us today. Always happy when you're here with us, so thank you for that. Do we have any flag update? Do we have a date for our work day yet, other than the fact we're going to do one soon?
The first nice warm Saturday.
First nice warm Saturday.
We'll build flags.
Okay, so it will be coming up soon. I'm assuming before President's Day, you're thinking?
I'm hoping in sometime in February.
So the 4th, the 11th, the 18th, keep those on your calendar, and we have a lot of flags to build, a lot of repair to do. So it'll be May before you know we'll be putting out flags. Well, Terry Oliver, would you come and introduce our program for the day?
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Good to see all of you here today. I want to introduce you to Kevin Kendro. He's going to be speaking with us today. Kevin is the Assistant Director of Archives and Collections for the Irving Archives and Museum. He has been protecting and preserving the history of Irving for over 25 years. He began work as a student intern, actually, shortly after the archives was established. Kevin has a BA in history from UTA and an MA in public history with an archival concentration from UTA as well. So please help me welcome Kevin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all having me here to speak with you. And as Terry mentioned, I'm the archivist for this city, so I collect the history of this city. And what I have for you this afternoon is sort of a pictorial history of the founding of Irving and the early days of Irving, and then some of the large events that have occurred over the past 40 or 50 years that make Irving the city that it is today. So I like to start with this photograph first because it's very welcoming. Welcome to Irving. It's from 1941. All three of those girls are Irving High School graduates, class of 41. But what I really like about it is it shows us that in 1941, Irving's traffic signal system consisted of a stop sign. And they would request that you observe it. So Irving was founded in 1903, but beginning in the 1850s, settlers started moving into this area and creating farms all across it. And because this area that Irving is located in is between the forks of the Elm Fork of the Trinity River and the West Fork of the Trinity River, back in the 1850s and 60s, this was known as the Forks region, because it was between those two forks. As time passed from the 1850s, 60s, 70s, more farmers moved into the area and small informal communities developed, nothing like an incorporated town, just farming communities built up. And they were generally centered around a crossroads. Let's say, for example, the Kit community that you can see there near that green square. That was actually located at Irving Heights and Irving Boulevard, which right by Loop 12 and Irving Boulevard. So that area of this space between the forks became known as the Kit community. And the reason it got the name the Kit community is the man Ike Story from the Irving founding Story family built a general store. He also wanted to put a post office in that store. So when you want to put a post office in a store or at any location, you have to come up with a name for it. So he sent on his application to the post office department. He applied to get a post office in his store, and his favorite aunt was named Kathleen. Her nickname was Kit. So he named his post office Kit. So the store became the Kit store, and that whole area of farmland over there in eastern Irving became known as the Kit community. So it wasn't anything formal, it just kind of evolved over time. Another example is over here on the left side of the map, you can see Sowers. And Edmund Sowers bought a bunch of land on what is today right at Beltline and Pioneer. And that's where the Sowers Cemetery is. Well, in that same location, he put up a general store. He put up a blacksmith shop. A doctor moved in and opened an office. And that kind of became the nexus of that community of farms. And it got the name Sowers because Edmund Sowers was kind of the big wheel in that part of the county. So that's how things developed in the second half of the 19th century. So from the 1850s to 1900, it was very rural. There were no official cities or towns. It was just farm communities. Then in 1902, the Rock Island Railroad decided that their line at that time came from up north and stopped in Fort Worth. And they decided that they would continue the line from Fort Worth to Dallas and then down to the Gulf Coast. So for that span, that 30 miles between Dallas and Fort Worth, they broke it up into 3 10-mile sections and assigned 3 different survey crews to go out and survey a line for the railroad. This particular survey crew, could you go back? This particular survey crew was assigned the 10-mile stretch from downtown Dallas across Irving, what is today Irving, out to about Valley View Road. So that was their 10-mile stretch of lane. Halfway along their 10-mile stretch, they set up a camp. And that camp was on Henry Britton's land. And Henry Britton was a rancher. He owned a lot of land in the area. And so the survey crew got permission from him to set their camp up on his property because it was about halfway from the east end of their survey to the west end. So it was a good location for them to establish their camp. And these 2 young men were part of that survey crew. On the left side is J.O. Schultz. He was 27 years old from Iowa City, Iowa. He was a civil engineer. So he was the head of this survey crew that we just saw the picture of. Otis Brown on the right side, he was a member of the crew. He was a rod man. So he was a guy, when you see people surveying, one guy's always holding a pole. He was that guy. So he was 24 years old. He was from Swan Lake, Iowa. Not Iowa, Ohio, sorry. And while they were here, Mr. Schultz suggested to Mr. Brown that they found a town here. And Mr. Brown was in agreement. The reason they thought this would be a good area to found a town is down on the south side of town of Irving, where Irving was first established, there is sandy loam soil, so you could grow a lot of fruit and a lot of vegetables on a small number of acres. You didn't need 10,000 acres to make a living. You could grow fruit and vegetables on a small farm. Number 2, you didn't have to dig very deep to get to water. So that was 2 big pluses for a farming community. And number 3, they were here in October. They came here in October of 1902. So the weather was beautiful. Had they come in August, they might have packed up. So in 1902, early 1903, they finished their railroad business. The survey crew moved on to the next job. Schultz and Brown stayed here. They bought 80 acres of land from Henry Britton, the man whose land they were camping on. The land that they bought was very heavily forested in oak trees. I don't know if you've noticed, but in South Irving, there are a lot of oak trees there. So Schultz and Brown spent most of 1903 chopping down trees and pulling stumps to kind of sketch out their town site, so people would have an idea of where this town was going to be. So they spent most of the year doing that. In fact, there were so many stumps remaining from where they cut the trees down. Early residents of Irving gave it the nickname Stump Town. And in fact, the first civic organization, I suppose you could say, was called the Stump Detail. And these are the men who opened businesses along Main Street. And Once a week, they would take their shovels and their picks and go out into the street and pull stones to try to improve the roadways. So by December of 1903, after about a year of preparing the town site, Schultz and Brown decided they were ready to launch the town. And the way they do that is through a lot auction. And this is, could you go back? This is an advertisement that they ran in the Dallas newspaper. You can see the Irving Town Lot auction sale. It's going to be on December 19th. So even way back then, they had Santa Claus inviting you out here to this town, this lot auction. They ran a special train from Dallas to Irving, to future Irving. There were only two buildings there at the time of the auction. One was the railroad depot, and the other was the home of Otis Brown and his wife. They had built a small house, but otherwise, it was just vacant land with stumps here and there. So they did pretty well at the lot auction. They sold about 50 lots at an average price of around $40. So they had borrowed $2,000 from their parents to buy this land. And so on the day of the lot auction, they did make that money back so they could pay their parents back. And this is the plat of the first that Schultz and Brown filed with the county. So this is the first plat map of the city. And I like to show it because just as an example of how, you know, this was just two young men who decided they were going to start a town. It wasn't a company. It wasn't a development firm. It was just two young men. And that's reflected in the first names of the streets. Like you can see here on the left, that's Iowa Street. Today it's O'Connor. But back then, when they first founded the town, it was Iowa. And of course, that is the state that J.O. Schultz is from. The next street over is Ohio. That's the state that Otis Brown is from. The third street over from the left is Hastings. And Hastings is the name of the street that J.O. Schultz's fiance lived on in Iowa City, Iowa. So that's why we have a Hastings. Delaware, if you move more to the right, over towards the right side, of course, is named after Delaware Creek, which runs all through Irving. But at that time, it formed the western boundary up there, 80 acres. And then on the far right is Britton Road, which of course is named after Henry Britton, the man they bought the land from the town. So you can see it was things that were very personal to their own lives that they named the streets after. Now, this is a picture about 1905. This is Main Street, Irving. That's Main Street running in front of those buildings right there. You see that corral there on the right-hand side? Looks like a fenced-in area. Well, that, you can't really see it too good, but there's a water pump coming up in the middle of that corralled area with the handle where you would pump water. There was a trough around it, and it was for watering your horses. The thing of it is, though, it was right in the middle of the intersection of Main Street and Irving Boulevard. So that's your main intersection. So I guess it was inviting, you made your way to Irving from Dallas or wherever, where you could water your horse right there in the main intersection. Later on, this would prove to be a problem. And when Irving was first founded, it's hard to believe, but there were 3 general stores in town. And there probably weren't 150 people living in Irving, but there were 3 general stores. So you can see here, Mr. Ostrand had his general store. But in addition to his groceries and cold drinks, he put in a pool table. So that would help give him a leg up on competition. This was Irving's first bank. The bank was actually established in 1908. That bank went out of business. It was resurrected by a couple of guys who lived here in Irving. And it was known as Irving State Bank. And in 1912, they built this brick structure. And this is a view up Main Street from the south to the north. At the very, well, starting here on the left-hand side, that's Mr. Ostrand's grocery store or general store and pool hall. Across from it, that's Irving Boulevard running between those two men, that man in the white shirt and this guy over here on the left. Well, they're on opposite sides of the street. So that's Irving Boulevard running between them. That's the bank building next. Then, of course, the water tower being right in the middle. That little, the watering trough that was in the middle of Main Street, well, they decided to put a tank and a water pump and a water tower over that well and created the city's first water supply system. The problem is that from 1903 to 1913, things changed. It went from horses to cars very rapidly. And what they found is that when people, you're coming at this thing from all four directions, that when they got to the water tower in the middle of the intersection, people just created their own way around it. So you might go right, I might go left, we'll see what happens. So one of the first ordinances the city passed when they formed a city government in 1914 basically said that when you get to the water tower from any direction, turn right. So in effect, they made it a roundabout. Now this was Irving's first brick building. It was also along Main Street. It was called the Palace Drug Store. It was built in 1906. In 1912, it was the first business in Irving to put in a gasoline pump for the automobiles that were starting to become more and more common. He also was the first business in Irving to put in a soda fountain. So in the teens and the 20s, his was the hot spot for the teenage crowd to go to. And in 1909, the Irving Independent School District was established. This is the first Irving school building. It was one classroom upstairs, one classroom downstairs. And it was located where the senior center, the Irving Heritage Senior Center is today, is where this building was. Then in 1913, the school district built a modern 3-story red brick schoolhouse. It was right next to where that wooden building was, also on the land where the senior center is today. And all Irving's kids went to school in this one building. So from 1909, when the school district was founded in that first 2-story wooden building, to 1948, so roughly 40 years, all of Irving's kids went to school on this one 5-acre campus. And that's where the senior center is and the senior center parking. That whole area that today is the senior center was the school district at the time. And you can see up there, sort of top a little bit to the left, that's the 3-story school building, the red brick building. In 1930, this building to the left of that was built, and that was Irving's first, it was a freestanding high school. Then down here, this building at the bottom of the picture, it was built in 36, and it was Irving's new high school. So now you had a high school. What had been the high school became the middle school. And then the 3-story building became the elementary school. So all the kids went to school on this one campus for those 40 years. The first building built off this campus was in 1948. It was a new Irving High School building that today is Bowie Middle School.
Oh, wow.
And so, as I said, Irving started as just a little farm town located between Dallas and Fort Worth. It was slow growing. You can see here that in 1920, Irving had 350 people. 10 years later, had about 1,500. 10 years after that, had about 1,600. So it really, for its first 40 or 50 years, it really was just a small farm town between Dallas and Fort Worth. And this is a picture from the late 20s, about maybe 1930. And these two men are standing at the intersection of Irving Boulevard and Main Street that we've looked at. You can see that the water tower is no longer there. The building on the left, that was where Mr. Ostrand's general store was. He tore down that wooden building in 1917 and built this 2-story brick building. And he put the pool tables up on the 2nd story. The building on the right was that bank building that I showed you, except by this point, they had added a 2nd story to it. In 1932, the city built its first city hall building. They were first incorporated in 1914 and had a mayor and 2 council people, but they just met at each other's homes. Then in 32, they built a city hall building that was on 2nd Street, right near where the senior center is today, and it was just recently torn down. And then it was during World War II that big changes started to come to Irving. A lot of people left their farm work and went to work in the defense industry. And a lot of them from this area in particular went to work in North American Aviation, which today is LTV in Grand Prairie. So it was when the soldiers returned after the war, there was a housing shortage. Plus you had the baby boom that created even a bigger housing shortage. So Irving was located in the perfect spot to be in the first wave of suburbanization. It was only about 12 miles from downtown Dallas. It was still very rural, so there was a lot of inexpensive farmland that could be bought up and residential homes could be put on. So it was during the 50s, starting after 1952, that Irving transformed from this little farm town into a bustling suburb. It put the city in a mad scramble to build schools to accommodate all the new children and families that were moving in. There was to build shopping centers so people would have a place to buy groceries and whatever they might need. So during the 50s and 60s, it was just a scramble to keep up. And you can see from this that how quickly things changed. In 50, it was still only 2,600 people. But 10 years later, it was almost 46,000. 10 years after that, it was almost 100,000. And all of that is suburbia breaking out across the area. This is an aerial. This is actually from '64. The highway going across the bottom there, that's 183. The street going kind of diagonal across there, that's Story Road. The building right there on the top right corner, that's Crockett Junior High School. So Plymouth Park is just above Crockett right there. And you can see from this picture that even in '64, there was still a lot of land to be developed along 183. You know, look at all that open space where today there's not an inch of open space. And you can look back in the distance and see that homes are being built, but there was still a lot of space even in '64 to continue building. And to accommodate this outbreak of population, the city built a new city hall in 1956. The building still stands. It's the purchasing department today. It's right adjacent to the current city hall. So this city hall, they used from 56 to 76 when they opened the current city hall. And then this has been purchasing over the last 15 years. University of Dallas moved to Irving in 1956. To accommodate the growing population, the city opened its first municipal library in 1962. That building is right across the street from Irving High School on O'Connor. It's been added on to, today it's the Lively Point Youth Center, but it started as a 2,000 square foot library, Irving's first municipal library. In '65, the city opened a police and courts headquarters building separate from the city hall building. And that building is also in the same area as today's city hall. Today it's the fire department headquarters. And after 10 years, from the mid-50s to the mid-60s, the citizens of Irving put on fundraising campaigns and lobbied to get a hospital. And finally, in '64, a hospital was built. It was called the Irving Community Hospital. It's where Baylor Scott and White is today. And if you're driving up MacArthur from south to north, you can still see the dark colored windows there. You can still pick that part of it out. You know, it's been built all up around it, but some of it is still visible today. And after, you know, shopping centers were all the rage back in the 50s and early 60s, but then shopping malls became the way, covered shopping malls became the new shopping trend. And Irving got the Irving Mall in 1971. So we hit the big time in for sure. Then there were three things that happened that transformed Irving once again. We'd gone from a farm community to a suburb. And three things happened in the late 60s and 70s that really transformed Irving into the independent city that it is today. The first thing was Texas Stadium being built here in Irving. And the importance of that was that every time a game was on TV, the announcers would say, from Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas. So Irving got its name put out there nationwide. So it was the first nationwide recognition that Irving got. And this is a couple of pictures of the stadium being constructed. It broke ground in '69. It opened in '71. The first football game there was in October of '71. And in case you were in, the Cowboys beat the Patriots that day. And that, of course, was the finished product, which after decades of driving down 183 and seeing that over there, it is really amazing to go by there now. And if you didn't know it was there, you would never know there was a giant stadium at that corner. The second, and probably the most important thing that happened in the late 60s and early 70s was DFW Airport being built right on the western city limits of Irving. This is a picture from about 68. And I like this one just to show how out in the country the airport was back when they first built it. And this is just farmland. That white spot up there towards the top, that's where they started doing some earthwork for the airport at that point. But to me, it's just amazing how you think of it today and how it was back at that time. And here's just a construction picture. You can see how the terminals are horseshoe shaped, where you can see the shape starting to take place there, and the spine road that runs down the middle of the airport. And of course, the finished product. It opened officially, they had the grand opening in September of 73, but it didn't open for commercial aviation until January of 74. And the third thing that really changed Irving into the city it is today is the Las Colinas development. And Las Colinas started out as the Carpenter family's sort of weekend getaway. They lived in Highland Park. They brought some property in 1929 out here in what was really the wilderness back then. There was nothing out here. And they created a ranch where they did run cattle. It was a working ranch, but the family used it to come out on weekends. Then Ben Carpenter decided during the suburban boom of the 60s that they would start developing it as residential area. Then word got out that the airport was going to be put right over here, and they changed the plan to make his ranch not just as some more suburban housing, but to create the Las Colinas mixed residential commercial use that it is today. And that, and its approximation to the airport, brought so many businesses to Irving that increased the tax base so much that it really made Irving a standalone city. We weren't reliant anymore upon everybody going to Dallas to work and coming back here for the evening. And so this is just another picture of Las Colinas, the finished, well, it's sort of finished product. And so, in summation, what Irving began as 80 acres located between the forks of the Trinity River, today it is 69 square miles, a population of 260,000, and it takes all the land between the Elm Fork and the West Fork of the Trinity River. So, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. If you have any questions.
Just one question. Do you know if any of those original brick buildings, like the bank building, are still in existence?
The two-story pool hall building, that's still there. There's another building, it's Magnolia Chiropractic, if you're familiar. It was built about 1920. That building is still there. Those are the two. We used to have the city hall and the community building, but they got torn down. Yes,
When was the Rock Island Railroad at the time? You didn't show it, it didn't come in there.
yes, it did.
Because there's a water tower, you know.
It was 1 block north of that water tower. You know where the TRE runs today? That was the line that Schultz and Brown's crew surveyed. So that's the original rail line. The depot was right there, right at the head of Main Street. You know where the clock tower is on Main Street? That's where the depot was, right there. All right, well, thank you very much.
That's an amazing to see the history of Irving and the growth that began, especially in 1950. John, you remember climbing those stairs in that original school building, don't you?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the corner with a dust cap.
Yes. I was gonna ask Buddy if he was chasing you up the stairs. You were in that building. Well, it's amazing what has happened. I'm grateful for the civic leaders that have helped make Irving what it is today. So, Kevin, if you can stay around a few minutes, I may have some more questions for you, but let's stand if you will. We're gonna do our 4-way test of the things we think, say, and do. And Buddy, would you lead us in that, sir?
Prepare for second 4-way test, say or do. Is it true? Part number 1.
Is it true?
Second.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you for being here. Shane will be back next week. And if you have some questions, come on up and speak to our speaker. Thank you.